Hello everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at a pen which is probably one of the most interesting low-cost pens right now in the pen world, and that's the Jinhao X159. I'd have to be careful when I mention the number because I always confuse the pen with the pen which it is based with, and that's the Montblanc 149. We're going to be doing a little bit of comparison, or at least comparisons based on size and form and so on, but we're going to be concentrating on this the X159 today. As those of you who watched my previous video on ink reviews would have known, I was so excited when this pen came out that I actually bought two. And one of the interesting things which I noticed was there was a little bit, and these were probably one of the earliest pens that came out of the factory from Jinhao. I'm not 100% sure. The reason why I mentioned that is because this particular pen, which is inked up with Sukiyo, has a much better fit and finish compared to this one. I'll give you an example. For example, this ring down here, it has very little gap, or rather it has very little of a ridge, and it's very smooth when I run my hand over the ring, compared to this pen where there's a very pronounced lip, and I put that down to manufacturing tolerances, and this particular pen being kind of not made as well as this one. So just bear this in mind if you decide to get a X159, the quality control might not be the best. The other thing that I noticed when I bought my 159, and for this particular one, which had that little ridge that I showed you earlier on, this also had a cracked area down here. I think you can kind of make it out when the plastic actually cracked. And this was a worry to me because I have had Chinese pens, not just from Jinhao, but from other Chinese manufacturers, and they have tended to crack for no reason whatsoever. So I'll be watching this pen to kind of make sure that there's no significant cracks that will happen to this pen. And the place where all my pens have mostly cracked is actually at the cap down here. So like I mentioned, I will kind of take note of that and maybe give an update in a future video. So let's look at the X159. It's a reasonably large pen. I don't have the measurements when it's closed. Maybe I'll give that to you since I have my calipers out here, but when it's closed, it's about 14.7 centimeters. The more important dimension though is the length of the pen from the tip of the nib all the way to the end, and that's around 13 centimeters. And to me, that's a very, very good dimension, right, when it comes to writing. Before we get to that, the clip has the cap actually is very plain and simple, as opposed to another pen which you guys probably are familiar with, and that's the original 159 by Jinhao. And that one actually had a very elaborate and kind of fussy looking crest down here at the clip, which I did not like at all. This one is the one from the X159 is way plainer and very classic looking, and it operates decently well. I think it's good that Jinhao kind of stuck to a very plain design when it came to the cap and the clip. I mean, obviously, it is probably a clone of and it's the Montblanc 149. However, they did not include that Art Deco-like ridge that the 149 has, and obviously it doesn't have the 6-pointed star. But basically, I think it's a nicely designed clip that functions well. Looking at the rest of the pen, you know, like I mentioned, the ring before, this particular one is well finished when it came to the ring. It's very smooth, and the ring kind of tapers down to a round finial down here. There is a little injection molding point at the end of the pen. Obviously, if you get the 149, it will be totally smooth down here. Moving on to the inside of the pen. So this part of the plastic, like I mentioned, is totally plastic inside the body or the barrel. What's interesting about the X159 is that the converter is an improvement over the original 159 in that the converter actually kind of fastens very, very tightly, and I'll just show you what it sounds like when you insert it into the section. Not sure whether you will be able to make that out. First of all, the converter has a little ring at the end, which the original 159 one did not have, and you probably heard that there's a very secure fit into the section down here. Overall, I think the converter is pretty well made. You have metal section down here, or at least metal threads. And I'll just kind of close up the pen. And the section is very, very big, right? Very girthy at about probably about 12.7 millimeters. To me, that is probably a little bit too big to kind of be comfortable to write for long periods, but it will probably do for shorter writing sessions. And if I get used to the girth of the section, it will probably be okay. And most importantly, when it comes to the X159, we have that number 8 or number 9 size nib, right? And I'll just kind of measure the dimension of the section down here to kind of give you an idea of why they call it a number 8 nib. So the diameter of the bottom part of the nib is roughly about 7.5. So that's where that number comes from when it comes to sizing of the nib. And there's a little bit of ink coming out of my pen. So basically, why does the number 8 or number 9 nib make why is it such a big deal? Essentially, is you probably cannot find this size nib on any other pen at this type of price, right? In order for you to kind of get a big nib, regardless of whether or not it's gold or steel or any other material, you have to pay a premium. And for Jinhao to kind of come up with this size nib on this pen kind of makes a statement, I feel, from the company, that they are kind of willing to go up with the big boys and produce something which people are actually asking for, which is essentially a very large nib fountain pen. Since I have the nib out, show it to you compared to the original 159 by Jinhao, and that's probably a number 6 size nib in joule terms, and you can see how much smaller that 159 nib is. So it really is a game changer. It really is a big difference when it comes to not just looking at, but also when writing, right? And I'll bring out the 149 by Montblanc just to show you the difference between that pen. So the 149's nib is a little bit longer, and obviously it's more well decorated compared to the Jinhao's nib. So true to the Jinhao pens that they have made in the past, one thing about it is that they have actually indicated the nib width, which is at fine. I don't remember Jinhao actually doing that in the past. I could be wrong. You have the scroll work down here, which is very reminiscent of the 149 scroll work, and you have the dueling chariots with the Jinhao logo down there. Incidentally, the design of the feet is very reminiscent to a modern 149 feet, and this is my 149. You'll see how similar two feet are. Now, I typically don't recommend buying clone pens or pens that are too close to the original, but I made an exception for this particular pen. And the reason being, like I mentioned, it's really hard to find a large nib fountain pen. They are really not so common. And I'll show you a little bit of the writing for this pen. So this is the Jinhao X159, and it's in fine. So it's extremely wet, at least mine is. In terms of line variation, I don't think you would expect a lot, right, with this pen. Basically, it produces a very predictable, kind of in between. It's probably a Western fine, right, just to be fair to it. For my particular one, I needed to do a little bit of tuning to the nib, even to the other one, which was not working very well. But once I did a little bit of tuning, making sure that the tines were aligned, it writes very, very well. Basically, it's a very consistent line, no skipping, and the feel of that number 8 nib is fantastic. It's very comfortable in terms of a writing angle when you at least for my size hands, right? And it produces a very nice, predictable line, which I really like a lot. So since I have the 149 here, I'll just show you what it looks like when I write. And in terms of wetness for the 149 and this is actually, if I'm not wrong, it's actually the broad. So I mean, it's probably not fair to compare the fine down here with a broad Montblanc, but like I said, the feel of this particular pen is also there isn't much give, there isn't much line variation. It is a pretty hard gold nib. And it produces a very wet line, right? So I would say that in terms of when Jinhao actually produced the X159, they actually had a remit to kind of possibly duplicate the feel or the look of a 149 nib. And I think they actually achieved it, right? Basically, it's a smooth, wet nib, very reminiscent of a 149. Since I have the 159 out here, I haven't really measured it, and I don't think it's so easy to kind of measure the thickness of the nib. But I feel somehow that the X159's nib is slightly thinner or less thick in cross section compared to the 149, which means that this particular pen also has a little bit of bounce. Right, it has a tiny bit of bounce, which makes it very, very comfortable when writing. And that little bounce is kind of nice when using a big steel nib like this. Okay, I forgot to mention that on the clip it actually says X159, which is kind of a nice touch. So what do I feel about the Jinhao X159? I mean, I was so, like I mentioned, I was so excited when this pen came out that I actually bought 2 of them. And generally, I think you really cannot beat this pen at this price point. I bought these pens for roughly Singapore dollars, about 6 Singapore dollars. Both of them write, after a little bit of tuning, they write superbly. Very smooth, predictable, fine nib. I would kind of prefer that Jinhao actually comes out with more nib options. They probably have. I haven't checked on the market, but by the fact that they've actually indicated F or fine down here for these nibs that they are producing right now, they probably are planning to produce maybe a broad nib, and that will be great, or even an extra fine nib. That would be great for us consumers, who want a little bit of variation or a little bit of choice when it comes to choosing a nib. So a very good pen. I believe you really can't beat this pen in terms of performance. And if you're considering getting a large nib pen and you're not willing to pay high price for, let's say, a Montblanc or Sailor King of pen or something like that, definitely consider the Jinhao X159. I'll put all these pens side by side, kind of to let you take a look, and I'll let you comment below. What do you think about this pen? Would you get the X159? Are you all actually thinking about it? Let me know your comments. I'll be glad to hear that. And I will see you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.